Here's a question. When did you get into like were you like an intellectuals admin?
A lot of people have thought that. I was never actually on the account, but I was a member of a larger group chat where most of the admins were. And from the way that I understand the story, that was the origin of that account. But I was not incredibly active on it. So this was one of these, group DMs that runs like 24 hours a day for months and months. And I would maybe be in there once a week or something like that. So I can't really take credit. I was very fascinated. I think it's one of the biggest or most rapid growth trajectories of a shit posty type meme account. It went from like 0 to 20 something K in a matter of weeks.
Yeah, it
So
was that's how I met my friend Trevor actually through them, through that little thing. And before I seen that account, I was like, I kind of knew of like Politogram or whatever, but I had no idea that there was so much of like connectiveness to like these certain things. Or like I would see, like some TikTok or whatever on there, and then like on the next post, it will be like fucking Michel Foucault or something, some meme about, and I'm like, whoa, like there's like some real kind of shit in here, and it's very political. It's not just like, shit posting and kind of memes. And like from there on, I was like, whoa, this Instagram thing is kind of interesting.
yeah, the highs and lows of internet discourse is, I think, endlessly fascinating to me, and it's been, at times a uphill battle to get people to take this stuff seriously. It's been more easy recently because maybe because actual real world politics has become so cartoonish that now the online cartoons seem relatively more reasonable. But
Yeah. Ben
intellectuals really
Garrison type cartoons are now like real life.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're beyond irony and beyond satire for a while. Yeah, I think intellectuals though had it was really the quality of the content and the frequency of posting, and it just captured that voice or that chaotic gamut, all those antagonistic influences that are political internet culture. So it was a very very interesting arc to watch.
Yeah, what that reminds me of is like in my piece that I'm kind of working on, one thing that interested me when I was doing research on this is like in like just like like in my personal experience just getting on fucking Instagram and shit was like the such close proximity of the physical space of like let's say like, maybe more back in the day you like read a newspaper or you like watch cable news, and then you get on your computer to play video games or fucking like 4chan or whatever and like memes. But like now with social media, um and kind of like Instagram, like not only like or Facebook really. And I also did research with like majority. There's like some study that were like the majority of people get their news from social media, like Facebook. And it's like not only on the same app are you getting political information and your news, like in some instances people are getting their news from memes. Like not only are you finding memes in political information on Facebook, you'll find, like, oh, Trump just fucking killed the Iranian general or whatever, and then right below it you see a World War three meme. It's like now I remember like me waking up, I get on Instagram and I'm like, oh, what was his name, like General Soleimani or some shit like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm like, oh, I see these like World War three memes, and I'm like, what the fuck, and then I see some meme that Trump, that bomb or whatever, and then I was like, whoa, I just found out about this piece of political news, which traditionally people would find on cable news or a newspaper, and I just found it through a fucking meme. You know what I'm saying? And like, I wonder how many people, especially on Instagram, they're not really like reading fucking Jacobin articles or anything like that. They're just kind of slightly into politics. Like, how many of these people are getting their political news through memes like themselves? You know?
Yeah, I think the answer is an extraordinary number, would be my inclination.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
this was not a thing like 5 years ago.
yeah, it's been on a very steep incline. I mean, I think 2016 is its own phenomena where this stuff really starts to break loose. But we were already all the trend lines seem to indicate that people are gravitating away from these legacy media places into to online sources that are increasingly less and less reputable. I do think though we need to be very vicious and critical of journalism and the the news media industry in general, because there's a hazard in this where we can talk about people getting their news through memes as being a negative thing, and the unintended implication that people, or the unintended interpretation that people might walk away from that with, is that we should go back to
To mainstream media or
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
and it's like,
Yeah.
no, 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 that's might be worse in some instances.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, this is one of those fun kind of tightropes to walk, because you have to kind of say like, no, no, they're both bad, and we need an alternative. But generally, I mean, it seems very clear to me that a lot of people are getting their news through memes. A lot of people are getting their news through screenshots of a headline and an image beneath it that illustrates, which is essentially a
Mm,
top text meme format
meme.
anyway.
That is basically a meme. Wow, just a
Exactly.
screenshot of the article. Wow.
Right. And so as the journalistic standards have become increasingly lower and lower and more clickbaity, and just the attention economy of social media has forced them to make that change, where you find like listicles and outrage clickbait and whatever, comparatively, the rigor and integrity of memes has gone up. So there's a kind of dynamic equilibrium where these two lines are heading apart from each other. But it's become very unclear now, what is it that you're looking at, which is just this top text reaction pick image. Like, is this written by somebody who has a PhD, or is this written by a teenager who's like in between classes? You know what I mean? So
Right.
yeah, it's a complicated landscape, to say the least.
Yeah. Have you read Matt Taibbi's book Hate Inc?
I have not. I'm aware of him, and I try to stay up to date on these things, but I have not read his book.
Yeah, that like, also reading your article or your piece that came out of The Guardian today, like, some bits of that really reminded me of that, of, like, his book, and it's like, general, like, hating, it's kinda self-explanatory, but it's just like, like, from what the internet and, like, cable news and, like, the polarization, it's like we're made to hate each other or whatever from, and it's like, the internet has only accelerated that or whatever. There was an interesting, part in your piece where you talk about how, like, not only are, you say, like, the majority of, of discourse around, like, the kind of, radicalization, online radicalization has been about, like, the recommendation algorithms, or, it's like,
Mhm.
for listeners, the idea of, like, you have you watch a Ben Shapiro video or whatever, and then you get, PewDiePie videos, YouTube recommends you more and more of this kind of content, and then, like, at the end of the day, you're like a Nazi or whatever. But you talk about how not only is it really that, it's kind of, it can be more complex than that, and it's like, in a lot of cases, people go down these ideological rabbit holes. You say, not because they're cynically misled by platforms, but because they cannot find satisfactory answers in mainstream media.
Mhm.
Um, and that kind of reminds me of Matt Taibbi's book Hating, because he talks about how, oh, his book is supposed to be this, like, updated version of manufacturing consent.
Mm.
How Noam Chomsky, could have never imagined, he says, like, like, Noam Chomsky could have never imagined the effect cable news would have on politics in the last 30 years, and the internet and shit. So he's like, he felt like he needed to write, like, a revised version of manufacturing consent. And as I was reading manufacturing, or as I was reading Hating, I've realized, like, Matt Taibbi has no idea what the effects of social media will be on politics, like, the just the next 5 years, as increasingly more and more people, especially young people, are getting their news and political education through YouTube and Instagram and shit like that. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that, or, like, do you have any predictions of, like, what this will look like in the next 5 years?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's such a layered issue. Um, maybe just to drop a few references here so people have a proper orientation for this stuff. I think the funnel or the pipeline, whatever term you prefer, is I think pretty well trod territory that most people are familiar with. But generally, this involves becoming politicized on social media and slowly wading into more and more radical ideas. That is also part of the advertising model of specifically sites like YouTube, where they want to create longer user engagement and show you ads in between the videos. So they keep you watching. And the classic example is from Zeynep Tufekci, where she says if you watch a video about vegetarianism, the next one behind it is veganism, and then maybe the next one behind it is you only eat fruit that's fallen off a tree or something like that. But it's this slow escalation of a similar trend of ideas that keeps you hooked and pulls you down the rabbit hole, so to speak. So there's a few. Maybe we'll give just some mainstream examples of this. Rabbit hole, coincidentally, is the title of a New York Times podcast series by journalist Kevin Roos that begins with Faraday Speaks and his
Oh my
his
god,
YouTube
that fucking
video.
kid, Faraday speaks.
Mhm. I mean, it was a very important example of this stuff that was purely theoretical before. I think a lot of people had theorized this, but we didn't have the quantitative data or the
Mhm.
qualitative story. Kevin Roos is also the author of a very lengthy piece that has all of Faraday Speaks, his viewing history. The Making of a YouTube Radical is the title of the article. Preceding this, though, we do have to mention there's a report from Data and Society called the Alternative Influence Network by Becca Lewis, and this is generally kind of showing how this process works, where you can trace the cross pollination between different channels and different people platforming others, and you can, in some roundabout type of, recommendation sort of way, you can move from people who are just outside the mainstream, like a PragerU or a Steven Crowder, and within a few years time of viewing, or a few clicks, you can end up into the way far off, just unhinged Nazi territory and everything. um, yeah, so I think that is sorry, that's my long circuitous route of just saying that these are things that are pretty much well documented and understood in the online discourse currently, I think. That being said, within that, there is a hazard that people can miss the real unfolding material crisis around us. That, for 40 years, wages and productivity have been divergent, and the less people who are able to access the benefits of the mainstream, the more people move to the political fringes. And then you see, a rise on the right of, this expansion of the Overton window, seeing ascendant nationalism throughout all of the developed world, pretty much, but also a resurgence of socialism. So it's not the Overton window has certainly moved towards the right in terms of privatization and the neoliberal turn, and that arc specifically of America, but also of Europe. Um, but there is, a pretty much I think a universal expansion. Unfortunately, the left has not been performing very well given the current circumstances. Uh, but
Definitely not.
my hope is that through this process, we're actually just a few years behind.
Mhm.
Um, and so a lot of the work I've been doing is I've been talking to people who went down these similar rabbit holes and have now somehow found an exit ramp. A lot of them have become interested in left wing ideas. People don't tend to become depoliticized. They tend to make a 180. So, I've been calling this political refraction, for lack of a better term. But yeah, I wanted to write that piece specifically to try and um, float this idea on a mainstream platform and just get people thinking about social media as being um, that belief systems are in motion. Because in an age of really unprecedented political division, people have generally forgotten that it's possible to recruit people and to change people's minds. And I just wanted to, really show that that was still possible, and it's happening. It's happening in a way that a lot of people aren't aware of.
Yeah, and, one thing that was also interesting about, like, a lot of what you talk about in your work is how this kinda difference between millennials and, Gen Z or whatever. And it was funny because, like, you mentioned, like, a lot of Gen Z doesn't really care about monetizing their kind of internet personality or whatever their platform. But that goddamn Faraday Speaks kid, he really did make his fucking career. He made a career off this shit, man. Off and like I remember when this happened, and there was so much like, oh, I bet he's lying. I bet he did this to like,
Mhm.
and now he has like a Patreon and a YouTube channel, and it looks a little weird or whatever, right? Um,
Can I just sorry to be the contrarian, but I mean, I remember all the conspiracy theories. I remember people were saying that like, "Oh, he's part of some group. Somebody's
oh,
got
I
him
didn't really get in
on it,"
deep into the
whatever.
theories, but I bet there has to be plenty of them.
I do think though that after he made that video and the way that it blew up, some people say it's
Hmm.
cynical to start the Patreon. I think basically the rest of his life he's going to be subject to just an unreal level of online harassment from these dudes. So his career options may literally just be being an online guy. You know what I mean? So I'm pretty sympathetic to to
I'm
his
sympathetic too,
situation.
because it's like if it is real, I guess. Yeah, that makes sense. No, that is a good point. That is a good point. My thing was this: I was always fucking jealous. You know what I'm saying? And it was like, I guess my kind of bias. Also, and also like your piece, Marxist memes for TikTok teens. You talk about how in the kind of left leaning media landscape, we have like there's just a shit ton of content overflowing, like just disproportionately. There's just more content about issues of social justice, such as Black Lives Matter, police abolition, transgender rights, but a severe lack of economic or material analysis to follow it up, as you state. And also, you mentioned like like right now we're in like a crisis, we have the coronavirus, and people are jobless. So like right now would be a pretty good time to have a material analysis. But I guess like my estimation is that we lack economic or material analysis because of the structure of media, especially social media, and how the algorithms, and this kind of goes in like the Faraday speech thing, um, and how like algorithms favor cultural issues, like how the alt right and the alt right and like the left have these kind of cultural divides or whatever, and like Faraday speaks like that blew up because
Mhm.
it was that exact idea of this kind of divisiveness or whatever between like alt right and these kind of cultural issues or whatever. But like my idea is like we lack an economic or material analysis because how the algorithms favor cultural issues like Black Lives Matter and trans rights because they're divisive topics and they divide us and they make us like hate each other. And that's statistically shown over and over again, is shown to us like that makes way more money for the media industry than unifying topics such as class. um and the thing with a lot of these people going into the right or the alt right or whatever is that if people don't feel like the left is addressing their material needs, they'll have no choice but to go to the right. And that's how we got Trump. So my question is, how can we get over this difficulty and bring about a material analysis in the online left that is exciting to young people? In other words, how can we sell a material analysis to this new generation of people getting into politics in a way that'll actually get views and get clicks and grab their attention?
That is the question indeed. Yeah, I have to say I love your phrasing on this because I think it is almost implicitly a question of branding. That
Hmm.
you are, within the current system, you are trying to market people a more compelling narrative,
You have
and
to sell this shit, that you're
yeah.
writing.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and it's obviously it doesn't end at that. No one is doing this purely to have like a media organization, but the outreach has to happen somehow. And it seems that given all the current circumstances, it's pretty much going to have to happen online, just for the scale and the crowdfunding aspect. And it should not surprise anyone that the class war does not often secure venture capital investment. So yeah, generally this question of media, maybe we could call it like a manufactured consent for today. Um, there is, it's a pretty specific circumstance that we find ourselves in, and I think it is constantly surprising to people the degree of progressivism that contemporary finance capitalism has been able to tolerate. Uh, so, just a few years ago, really, I mean, there's been no period, as being a lifelong progressive, that you had seen these, I don't know, maybe like Budweiser having the gender identity koozie or whatever it was that they had last year. That was unfathomable. That was, this was, all these brands were kind of, upstanding, conservative, Americana, what have you, and as part of this media landscape, it's been a total turnaround. And I think, if there's a few reasons for that. Some of them are in good faith, some of them are in bad faith. But generally, uh, whereas those issues of social justice may have been an inroads to a political or material analysis that was, an inroad to Marxism, essentially. It seems to have been interrupted for a variety of reasons. And so, if you were to accept this funnel analogy of a broad network of diffuse messaging and recruitment over time that is progressively narrowed and clarified into a set of ideas, it seems to be in our current media ecosystem that there's a pretty big lap, or a gap, or a missing link in the chain between these, very popular, abundantly popular and accessible narratives of social justice that are occurring online, and the subsequent material follow up, in that you will very often find people, who end up inadvertently making arguments in support of, essentially, people who work in like media and entertainment positions or the culture sector, but do not really seem to help working people in the large scale of things. Um, yeah, and for me, the process that I'd like to see happen is, I guess, the best bet for this, which both you and I are very interested in, is BreadTube currently, which is, I think, quantitatively the largest example of this. It also happens to be, just strategically in the article, the most accessible way to make this argument, because the funnel has been so thoroughly mapped for the right wing stuff. I do think also, just to, and sorry, I realize this is a long route, but this is quite a complicated topic that's all baked in together. But there is this problem of like what the platform wants from you, that it wants to kind of set people off into these balkanized groups, where they fight between each other, and rather than creating this like broad coalition that would lead to a kind of class consciousness, and eventually political action. What seems to be the most important thing to learn from what happened in the last few years about this right wing funnel is that the guys who came out of that, the guys who went down the rabbit hole, came out the other side as these far right lunatics. They hate social media. Like, everything, everything that they believe is not an intended byproduct of the way these platforms are set up. So we could say, generally, these American social media platforms are culturally left and economically right. This is a very
Mhm.
low resolution analysis, but the emergent American nationalist right is culturally right and economically left. So it's a total inversion of what the platform intends to shape
Hmm.
these subjects as. And I want to take that as an indication that you can build counter hegemonic movements through the current system of social media. I think that's, it's very dangerous, obviously, because these guys are a huge threat. But I think this is an indication that it is possible to do. And so I'm trying to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, same here. Shit. Yeah, that's the idea. Um,
Can
y
I ask on this topic? Sorry if this is a little bit of an adjacent thing. Tell me if
oh,
it's too
no, go
much of a
ahead.
tangent. But it was such a pleasure to come across your channel and in doing this research, because it seems like you're into all of like the stuff that I think is really cool, and the stuff that I would like a lot of other people to be into. So I'm curious. I mean, obviously, like, you've had your own political journey through this, and part of what you're doing now is, I guess, doing political education, really, and kind of, spreading the word of the things that were, that you found most important. But I'm curious, if maybe you would just give me a bit of an orientation of how you found your way into this stuff, because I think, relatively, these topics, or this cluster of topics, is kind of the minority opinion on social media, it seems. So I'm just curious of like how you found your way to it, because I'd like to be able to replicate that for a bigger audience.
Oh my god, sorry. Yes, I'm in an important call right now. So I'll be right there.
Oh, we can cut too. We're not in a
Oh
rush
no,
here.
no, no, no. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. But no, yeah, I think that is super interesting. But and yeah, that's the thing for me is just like, that's the interesting part about it is like, um, how do we like get people here? Because like my thing, and like what, so like, or sorry, is your question like how did I get started on the YouTube?
Yeah, just generally like, how did you find your way to YouTube? How did you find your way to Mark Fisher? That kind of stuff.
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. And no, Mark Fisher, man. And also, let me just say real quick, that meme with fucking Jared Leto Joker, capitalist realism, that is the funniest shit. I don't know why, but that is so great. But anyway, yeah, I guess so like I've been generally kind of into like Marxism and I was more into film and this is like all the way back to 2014. Like 2012 I was like watching like fucking Vice, that went back before they were this huge fucking liberal, um, you know, thing that they are now, and they are like kind of cool. And um, for me, it was just like the majority of a lot of these people. It's like 2016 is whenever it was like 2014. That was whenever I started to write. I was like into film, and I wanted to write this like it was going to be like a short film. I kind of at one point I was turning into a show that I was like pitching to Adult Swim or whatever. It was fucking stupid. But anyway,
Hmm, hmm.
it was kind of just about politics, and it was 2014, and it was cringe or whatever. But it was about like weed and rap music or whatever, and kind of internet culture. I was super interested in internet culture even back then. And then in 2016, all of those all of those interests started to become more like I really just cared about the politics. Like all of the other kind of stuff kind of I got less interested in. I got more and more interested in politics. And then I'd like write, I had this now deleted Medium account where I'd like write and I've kind of, met some friends through my writing or whatever. I'd write about movies and shit like that and like DMT and acid and like Terrence McKenna and kind of goofy shit like that. And then by 2016, I was really writing about politics a lot. I didn't really have an audience though. And then someone was like, one of my friends who I met through him reading my work, and he's kind of a friend of mine. He was like, "Yo, you need to get on this bread tube thing. Just turn these essays into video form. Just record yourself fucking reading out the script." And he was like, "I promise you, you'll get more views or whatever, or you'll just get more people looking at your stuff." So I did that in like August of 2019, I believe. Um, and ever since then, I've been way more into like just online in general. So like that's kind of that there's kind of like for my story, I guess it's just there's three big dates. 2014 generally is kind of when I kind of got into politics and I was like reading the Communist Manifesto or whatever, like kind of, just generally. And the 2016 is the time where I really started to focus more on the politics itself. And then by 2019, I was, reading a lot of, like reading theory and shit, Louis Althusser, Foucault, Adolf Reed. And then I just made my channel in 2019 and I just never guessed. I never would have thought that anyone would care for what I was saying. And surprisingly enough, people really fucked with it. And I've just been going from there. Yeah, 2019 in the YouTube shit. And it was just like, I have like friends who are like, I mean, these people are like, older guys, or they've been to college and shit, and they're out of college, and they would like write these Medium articles that they spent fucking months on, and like five people will read them, right? But
Right,
but
right.
the thing was with the YouTube is it was a platform for which you can just get your voice heard by a lot more people. And I hated the idea of becoming a YouTuber. That was like the most cringe shit I could possibly think of. Um, and I guess I just did it. I finally could because I was thinking about doing it for like a whole year before I did it, and I finally was like, "Fuck it, I'll do it." And I slowly learned how to make the videos better and better. My writing kind of got better, and yeah, and the thing is, it's just like like I'd watch like breadtube videos and shit like that in like 2017, 2016, and I would realize like, whoa, if I didn't watch this video, I wouldn't have maybe like got into Deleuze and Guattari, and I wouldn't have found Mark Fisher, and if I wouldn't have read Capitalist Realism, my whole life would be different. So I was
Totally.
like, whoa, maybe, if I make a video, even if it doesn't get that many views, maybe someone is like, subconsciously learning about interesting shit and important shit. And they might, do something with it, you know? And I've had people actually message me and tell me that, I've changed their minds politically.
Yeah, it's really fascinating what happens at the scale of social media. I think it's just part of uh, just being human that our brains really have a difficult time comprehending what it really means to talk to that many thousands of people at a time,
Yeah.
because it's also part of maybe a occupational hazard. I'm sure that's the wrong phrase to use, but when you're super familiar with these topics, you have internalized so much that you forget how revelatory these ideas were the first time you encountered them, and you're
Hmm.
kind of at like, you're at letter Z, and your audience is only at letter A, and you have to
Yeah.
just sometimes like just hand them a link. And YouTube really does seem to be just quantitatively, the reach of this stuff is really, really significant, and that alone demands that it has to be taken into consideration. um, the total readership of all of these articles is obviously much less than a few million views on some of the bigger videos. um, yeah, yeah, which is I guess something that, me being an artist and having made stuff online and having done viral things in the past, like I had always known. But similar to you, I think probably to everyone, in 2016, there is this just massive rupture where all of this stuff is real in a way that is not just interesting or theoretical or speculative, but it's actually happening. And it's happening to politics in the way that um, previously, bands and all types of cultural content had these viral surges. But yeah, the all of the cultural narrative just moves into the total circus of the 2016 election, and it seems to have been just perpetually stuck in that news cycle ever since. So I'm hopeful that is presenting the opportunity as the broadest net of the a politicization funnel, that our entire social media experience is just littered with political content all night and day. And maybe maybe your experience outside in the sky and the atmosphere right now, if you're on the West Coast, is also immediately politicizing and impossible to ignore. It's coming at us from a variety of different angles.
Oh yeah. Um, Also, I was gonna ask you, when did you first get interested in Mark Fisher's work, and how does it influence your own work?
Yeah, he's such a incredible influence on my way of thinking about this stuff.
Yeah, same here.
Um, Yeah, I'm trying to remember when I first got in. I think it was through the art world, where a friend, an artist, and a collaborator sent me a PDF of capitalist realism. This is years ago, maybe in 2013 or something like that.
Oh, no shit.
Um, yeah, yeah. So it's but these are not really unfamiliar names in the art world. There's like a cluster of people around goldsmiths and efflux and all of these types of publications that talk about these crazy kooky left wing ideas, but it's all totally just academic and in the art world, and none of it is real or really a threat or whatever. So I was always generally aware of those things, and I was educated as an artist, and was introduced to theory and whatnot. But it wasn't until I saw the way that young people were reacting to our media landscape, specifically our social media landscape, in around that time of 2016, that something kind of broke in my my way of understanding this world, and I was like, wait. this stuff is like it's not just something that has to be on the back burner, like a critical lens that you bring to everything that, as artists, we are trained to ruthlessly criticize everything and call it neoliberalism, um, which is, most often accurate. But
Super real, yeah.
yeah, but there was a way, when I saw people around the age of like 13 getting into Marxism in like a serious way, like a David Harvey type of way that they would do his online classes or something. I was like, "Oh shit, this is actually something real and something different is happening here." And I guess I've spent the next few years trying to investigate how that process happens because it's endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, for me, I guess I first read it in like 2014, 2015, Capitalist Realism. Um, and then it was not until recently, like 2016, 2017, um, is whenever I really realized this kind of connection between his idea. Like I really realized like this kind of he had this idea of reflexive impotence. And then it's like what that has to do with kind of like this new kind of feeling, it's like this kind of postmodern, but in today's sense, postmodern or whatever, but it's kind of like this post irony internet culture. And it's like, a lot of people talk about how like memes now, like at first there was like ironic memes, and then now memes are so, like the cycle of it is so crazy that it's like we went from irony to now we're in post irony. Now it's actually sincere in a certain way. And it was just like I felt like it was just like an absolute refusal, or like an absolute like they cannot. They just like a lot of these memes and younger people, they just could not say anything sincerely. And like when you're dealing with politics, a lot of it is very real. A lot of these people are really like, look, I care about people dying, and I want to help. Um, but it's just so hard to say that without being cringe or whatever, and it's like it's so post ironic. And it reminds me of because like Mark Fisher talks about his students or whatever, and how,
Hmm.
like he sees like this idea of reflexive impotence in them, where it's like, he says like my students want to learn about Nietzsche in the same way they get a cheeseburger. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, it's been so long since, like the Soviet Union fell and shit like that, that it's like we're now in a point culturally where I guess it's like people are so depressed um that they feel like, it's kind of hopeless. And I feel like you can kind of see that in the culture and in the memes. And that's what really got me interested in focusing on Mark Fisher in my work, like really focusing on him.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, there's so much there. I think, in general, this trying to dig to the bottom to figure out if something is ironic or sincere or whatever, it's really never ending, and it's a different case for everybody, and it's a different case for every post, So, you could probably break it down of like, 50-50, 80-20, is this guy for real? I mean, needless to say, there's really no internet political movement that is too fringe or too ridiculous that there isn't someone who earnestly and unironically believes this, and that is part of the ideologies that you see pop up of all of these ridiculously, and it's kind of self-contradictory belief systems like libertarian monarchism, off the top of my head. But then you dig, and these things are actually kind of real in some fringe corner and whatnot. I think specifically with the influence of Fisher, what he does so well is he really describes how it feels to live under neoliberalism and the politicization of mental health and the kind of subjective experience of operating in this super free market but also tightly bureaucratic system, and that has been I guess a really significant influence on me in writing about social media, particularly of like how it feels to be in the news feed and get your become shaped by this content and whatnot. Um, I think though there's yeah, Fisher is an important influence for a number of different reasons. I think the other thing that is that I take inspiration from, and I think a lot of other people do, is that he his willingness to bring a political analysis to something that you previously might not have considered was even political content. So for him, famously, this would be the example of music. For
Oh
me,
yeah,
it
like
was social media.
Burial or whatever that album is, or that's like musician.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, lots of writings and musings on music and related subjects. And so I've tried to bring that to things like video games and things like social media and whatever. Um, yeah, yeah, it's really I can't cite his stuff enough. I think I repost those memes so much just because it was such an formative influence for me, and I think it's just good for people to be acquainted with that kind of thinking.
Oh yeah, like I think Mark Fisher also is like a like if there was anyone, if there was any like every time someone asked me, what book they should read or whatever, I kind of lazily just tell them capitalist realism, funnily enough. Like I think a lot of people do that. Um, but it's just like, man, he really was on like a lot of things on a lot of different levels. He was really like incredibly influential and correct about a lot of things. And like, oh my God, so like like all the things he predicted too. You know what I'm saying? Like shit that he wrote about in 2009 and how it's like
Yeah.
only gotten worse from there. Um but in your piece, like, and also like the thing about uh Fisher and a lot of like topics with like music and stuff is that you can kind of, someone will click on a video because they want to, like learn about a certain music or a movie that they liked, and then they watch the video and they kind of go down this rabbit hole of like you can make a video about uncut gems or whatever and put like political analysis in it. So like someone can be apolitical or whatever, and then watch the Uncut Gems video, and then you know maybe is convinced of a few political opinions or whatever. But and I think that's super interesting, and that's also what I've tried to like do research on is like how can we kind of get people, and I think Mark Fisher's work is so true to that because it's like he talks about like depression and like real shit that people are going through, and he gives it a political explanation. And I think that's really useful for getting people like down the pipeline or whatever for the left. Like your article mentions, it's like, like the point of your article is kind of how it's like where a lot of research is going in is, a lot of research is dedicated to mapping out the right wing pipeline, but not so much for the left wing pipeline, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'm
But yeah, but my question is like, why do you think that is? And because I have some ideas, but what are some ways you think we can learn more about the left wing pipeline, and like what can we how can we put that to use?
Yeah, that's well, you've stumbled on the I think one of the hidden arguments in the piece is that why do we know so much about these right-wing pipelines? It's because the emergent American nationalist movement, specifically, I think a lot of these things are American. This stuff really is a threat to the existing order. It's not the type of threat that I'd like to pose to the existing order. It's not the future that I'd like, but the organizations that produce these studies and the platforms themselves are broadly aligned in with, I guess, like the Democrat plan of doing harm reduction, right? I mean, we wouldn't expect Alphabet to be a radical communist organization or anything. So
Right.
they really don't have an interest in mapping this stuff. This has to be mapped by people who are very aware of social media, very engaged in social media, and are explicitly left leaning because no one else is going to do it for us. So I thought, my role as an artist, artists are kind of allowed to float crazy, radical ideas, and it doesn't seem like a threat. Because that's the art world is kind of defanged in a way that everything is just an experiment and can be brushed off quite easily. So that puts me in the unique position where I can say I think, pretty radical things on a very mainstream platform, and there's very little risk of blowback because, at the end of the day, I'm a guy who makes pictures that hang on a wall, and that's about it. Um, I mean, the one thing maybe to um, I think we would be remiss to not mention this is that um, the idea of Fisher's lost futures and the slow cancellation of the future, and hauntology, and the kind of the world that could have been were it not for the neoliberal turn, that we seem to find ourselves like just stuck in this endless repetition of 80s aesthetics and whatnot, and this nostalgia for that
Mhm.
period. Um, some of those things are really real in a way that can't be steered out of. Like the climate catastrophe, the impending devastation of that is quite serious and does pose a pretty significant finite limit on fully automated luxury space communism and whatnot. So I think if you can start from Fisher, if you can start from uh, having a this idea of a utopian vision that was lost or derailed somewhere. And then you can kind of work your way backwards from that. That revitalization of the political imagination, I think, is specifically the thing that is missing from our contemporary, online social media landscape, and that no one really feels optimistic about anything right now. Right, the time machine memes, the oh, you just bumped your head and you woke up. Like everyone is trying to
Oh,
escape
yeah,
this current, yeah.
I literally have that written down, those 2 exact memes, the "Finally You're Awake" one where it's like, "Oh, you bumped your head," and the time machine one. I literally have that, and I was like, "Man, these things seem to just, like, speak to some kind of, like, very depressing idea that they just wanna get the
Mhm,
fuck out
mhm.
of now." They just don't like being alive today, whether if it's, like, going back in the future, or I mean, like, back in the past or into the future. Um, it just feels like just not wanting to be in our contemporary time.
Yeah, and there's, I think the thing that we can learn through Fisher is that there's always an underlying material cause for why these cultural narratives tend to latch on to people, or why people tend to latch on to them. If we take that material analysis, then we can do a lot better for understanding why these cultural trends are on the rise that they're on. Um, yeah, yeah. So that's, I mean, that's I think maybe the most important takeaway for the relevance of his work right now.
Yeah, no, that's a really good connection, like, his idea of, like, lost futures and this kind of, like, time machine meme and the "Finally You're Awake" meme, wow.
It's
Um,
it's funny, when I was watching these spaces, maybe a year ago now or so, at a certain point, people started to post just pictures of, like, a sci-fi landscape. Like, it would be like this, uh, a high-tech city utopia, like a techno
are you
utopia.
talking about, like, if LMAO still made music, this is what
Yeah.
society would look like?
Things like that for sure, but even preceding that in the mainstream, the political accounts I would follow would just post the landscapes with no pictures. And
Hmm.
sometimes they would be a dystopia where it's like overgrown and the city is crumbling. It looks like something from a zombie apocalypse or what have you. But these images all come from role-playing games. They come from sci-fi. They come from fantasy. And the way that I started to connect this was that these seemingly very silly political accounts that are mostly run by shithead teenagers. I say that endearingly because I really do enjoy what they do and respect it. But this kind of RPG aesthetic was a way of jumpstarting the political imagination, that they had a future to even imagine, and they could use that to then calculate their political activity in the present. So, those images, which I was tempted at the beginning to dismiss because it was, some silly like Dungeons and Dragons or Call of Cthulhu or whatever, like type of silly, aesthetic, whatever. That stuff isn't political. Once you bring the kind of the lessons that we learned from Fisher, it's like, oh, actually, wait, this stuff is super important. And LARP and role playing and all of these things, like that is like this utopian kernel of the political imagination. Like maybe we should really be paying attention to it. And when you take that kind of a lens to it, the larpy online silly internet stuff and the the IRL and the URL politics, it does seem to be much closer to a circle than a Venn diagram when you look at it that way.
Oh yeah, and Frederick Jameson
Mhm.
has some quote where he's like the fiction and like the movies, like if you really analyze these things and like the dystopian novels or whatever, like they're super potent in the kind of ideas of like expressing um like expressing political opinions in the modern time, or expressing certain things that we disagree with right now, uh like Starship Troopers and all of that. It's like
Mhm.
these Frederick Jameson, like the quote goes something like, these dystopian novels or whatever, these dystopian movies are supposed to be a critique of modern society. um and it's just like the idea of like what the future is going to be like or whatever. But it's kind of like in a way in which we can critique like modern or contemporary political problems or issues that we have, and you can just like see that in like the dystopian, like Blade Runner 19, like came out in like the 1980s or whatever, and like it is super like lost future kind of like Mark Fisher type
Mhm.
stuff. And like Mark Fisher was even very heavily influenced by Frederick Jameson.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Jameson is also a very very significant influence, and especially the American Utopia, the Universal Army, is a personal favorite. I think the way that I tend to connect this stuff to the memosphere now in general is that you see the Blade Runner memes, you see certainly a lot of these young people came through the game world and now are into the world of politics. Um,
Hmm.
but it seems, in a weird roundabout way, that the game world, um, I think in some unexpected ways, very adequately prepared people for what political activity should have been the whole time. In that, when you exist in these online spaces, whether it's message boards or it's a guild or whatever in the simulated world, these things have their own structures of governance that all needed to be sandboxed inside of the game or on the message board. So sometimes it's total anarchy. Sometimes it's just every man for himself and just chaos reigns or whatnot. But sometimes they have very rigorous and democratic systems. And I mean, there's corporate systems, like Eve Online is as maybe the most prominent example. But then there are also all of these other really fascinating layers. And what you realize is that people were I guess, in a way that seems totally divorced from the real world, actually trying on a lot of political ideas. You see things like this being played out in Minecraft. A friend of mine was in a server that they decided to nationalize all of the farms, not for ideological reasons, but just because that was the greatest way to harness the productivity of the server. And
Whoa.
it's very fascinating because a lot of these gamer types are kind of right wing libertarians or worse, but they end up reinventing these left wing economic systems when they engage in the sandbox that is only in the game world, but outside of ideology and politics of the real world. So it has been kind of this back door into all of the stuff that Jameson talks about when he discusses utopia. So that's been I guess my own personal rabbit hole and curiosity that I've been diving down for the past few years now.
Yeah, that's actually incredibly interesting. It sounds like some like John Rawls type shit. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Like the idea of like now you can actually simulate a kind of little economy or whatever in a video game. And it's like people are subconsciously making like communism or whatever. That's really interesting. Um and I that also plays in kind of like this idea of like, you mentioned you also have a piece irony, politics, and Gen Z, right?
Mhm, mhm,
And you mentioned even in there like this like need for a materialist left. You mentioned how like the cultural shifts and the generational realignment in the last years has given us strong evidence that we need a materialist left. And I that's really the focus of my work is like how can we bring about this materialist left, and it's like go against neoliberalism and kind of like some of these cultural issues or whatever. Um but in like in your opinion, or like in your idea, like how much does politogram, or maybe even thing like, politogram is more explicit, but maybe even something like TikTok, how can TikTok maybe even be used to bring about this materialist left?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, TikTok is it's really a rat's nest of issues. I mean, I wrote about TikTok in December of 2018, really during the viral peak when it skyrocketed to number one in the App Store, and everyone had never heard of this thing. I mean, it is a very specific
You really
jaded
hit the
art.
nail on the head on that with that piece, yeah. Is that the
They
same one that got mentioned by Paul Joseph Watson?
that is the one. Yeah, yeah. Who he later made a video stealing Fisher's argument about
Oh yeah, I also
that
seen
all
you said
music
that.
sounds the same and whatnot. Yeah, I mean, a lot of things were
Didn't he
happening at that
steal
time.
something from the slow cancellation of the future or whatever?
Yeah, yeah. It was.
Um,
I think it was about pop music and how everything today sounds the same. I mean, it's a pretty common take now, but I mean, a lot of these kind of right wing grifters have a way of repackaging a left wing analysis of cultural stagnation,
yeah, because they're
and then
saying real
yeah,
shit too. You know what
yeah.
I'm saying? It's
That's
it's
how they
kind of
get people.
real.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing is like there's little bits of truth in it, and I think like in your piece you're kind of talking about how like he, like, oh, it was kind of awkward how he took your piece and kind of made it into kind of something else. You kind of say, but Paul Joseph Watson, he's fucking crazy or whatever. He has stupid opinions or whatever, but watching that video where he mentions, your piece, he's I really see why he's kind of dangerous is because he's talking about real shit. Like that is kind of real, that it's like, like these like TikTok teens or whatever, they're not even really more conservative than millennials or whatever. They just want to be whatever the opposite of millennial liberalism is. You know what I'm saying? It's just kind of like this idea of like being fed up of this kind of liberalism that's been kind of really solidified by the millennial generation. And oh
Yeah.
my, there was some fucking meme that came out in like 2017. It was literally the funniest shit. One of my favorite memes. It was like, Generation Z versus millennials, and like on the millennials, it was like, oh, thanks Harry Potter is political or whatever on millennial, and then like, and then on the Gen Z, it was like, um, they think even Chapo Trap House is liberal.
Yeah,
And
I
I was
remember
like,
that.
that's
Yeah.
so fucking funny, because like Chapo Trap House is supposed to be like this dirt bag kind of thing or whatever, but it's like, Gen Z, they even think Chapo is liberal, and it's like, um,
That's
I
pretty
def,
correct, I think. They
yeah,
they really do think that way. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're a lot more polarized and kind of radical than the previous generation. And obviously, I kind of just think that's, getting your news and your politics from social media. You're less likely to run into pieces of information that you disagree with. And you're more likely to fall to kind of, jump on one polar side or the other.
Yeah, I think that was one of the primary motivations for the piece. I mean, I felt responsibility to respond when your work is, appropriated in that way, I guess is the right phrase. But I mean, it is really a fascinating kind of thing because I mean, it's not like he reads like a tiny quote. It's like he reads like 3 or 4 minutes of it. It's like a good portion of the video is just my text, which is
He kind of just,
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I take that as a win, by the way, that
no, that
I
was
somehow
great.
duped him into reading the yeah.
That's what I kind of was trying to say is like, no, he's actually kind of saying some real shit here. And I think there definitely has to be, out of those millions of subscribers, there has to be some people that are not fully fucking Nazi brained or whatever. And they're kind of like, whoa, who's this Joshua Citarella guy? He's saying some real shit here. I might look into him. And then boom, they're now more of a leftist and, the pipeline or whatever. So I actually think that's actually, positive.
There very well could be people, in that. I mean, I think with the
I mean, there
scale of
just
that kind
has
of
to be
stuff
statistically.
People yeah, statistically there are, but I mean, it's probably, I would suspect, the edge case, for it, unfortunately. But I think the most important thing to respond to is that generally his thesis was that, Gen Z was moving to the right, and my way of responding is like, "Well, that's true, but it's half the story because Gen Z is just more politically polarized than previous generations because of, essentially all of the things that we've been talking about in this, in the podcast so far."
Right.
I mean, the one of the things that I thought was, this necessary part of the puzzle was to bring, the Fisher inspired political analysis to social media itself. And so one of the things that I have to, uh, give credit to as an inspiration is, Fred Turner, and Nora Khan, who is, an artist. But they have a really wonderful conversation that I think was on, 032C a few years ago. I put it on the syllabus for my students, but generally, Fred Turner's work is about the history of Silicon Valley. His, very famous book is called From Counterculture to Cyberculture, which is the story of the 60s and 70s communes of California through the Whole Earth catalog, through Stewart Brand, into the emergent, hacker scene of the 80s and 90s, into these ideas of cyber utopianism, and cybernetics. It's this very complicated, very layered belief system. But the way the way that you trace all these things back is that there are, um, pretty direct through lines of the ideological influences for the, 68 communes to the early Silicon Valley of these Randian heroes that, believed in the kind of utopian connected societies, and then into the seed of Silicon Valley that is also tied up in the military industrial complex in a very interesting way, and that it's literally built over, where a lot of those warehouses used to be. But it's not just like the books that they reference, it's literally just some of the same people who lived in communes and then became venture capitalists in the early days of Silicon Valley. So the way that he brought this ideological analysis, or this influence, this analysis of the ideological influences to the tech, to this very dry, very material, mechanical, diagrammatic type of thing, um, that really, inspired me in writing about TikTok. And Nora Khan has a wonderful, the name of her book is eluding me right now, unfortunately, but she was discussing, the way that we begin a lot of these MMORPG type of games is that we are this kind of flat plane, this character that is then customized, and everyone starts out on this level playing field, absent history, absent any other identity, that we literally move through the world in the exact same way. And this is just fundamentally, not the way that the real world works, obviously, but that itself, the very design, is, a kind of inspired by, this libertarian worldview that we should all
Mm.
be, Friday, on the island, who is, cobbling together, a shelter, and he owns these coconuts, and there's this like mythology of laying claim to property rights that are, never subject to colonialization or primitive accumulation or any of the necessary violence for those things to have transpired, and that there is like some, mythical level playing field. And that just, I mean, thinking that way, bringing that type of a lens to TikTok, um, I was looking for political connections in the diagram of how the network related to each other. For me, a lot of that was tied up in the duet chain, specifically in late 2018, of this kind of, dialectic between collectivity and individuality. But I mean, the duet chain has all but entirely vanished from TikTok, and it's a totally different platform now. So unfortunately, I've become quite annoyed and disappointed in the way that TikTok has gone. And I've said as much on various platforms and things like that. But there was a really, I think, early, potential for collectivity on TikTok specifically that did not resemble the more competitive, bootstrapping, individualist, platforms of stuff like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, perhaps.
Yeah, that is, yeah, and it's also really funny because it's like there's something with like libertarians. They have this like real. There's like some pattern where these people really have like no concept of history, and I
Yeah, yeah.
guess like I guess like Marxist, like the whole thing of Marxism is like, historical materialism, like understanding how, these like nations and these and like the economy has developed through primitive accumulation and stuff like that. Um, and yeah, there's something really, and it's also like I think you mentioned, a lot of these like libertarian Marxism or a lot of these wacky ideas that have something to do with like anarcho-capitalism or whatever. A lot of them seem to like have like a lack of historical understanding. Um,
Yeah, there's a
but
great meme that satirizes this of just I forget the card game, but it's something uh seizing property violates the NAP, and then the counter card for that is like, how did they get the property in the first place? It's I mean,
yeah.
the belief system is kind of like a two-sentence punchline, but a lot of people who are in the sandbox and very young will, starting from being, subjectivized as a liberal, will just begin at property rights as like, diagramming out their political utopia. So I think I'm sympathetic to the ANCAP stuff on the early side, but obviously, yeah, there's no idea of history in that analysis.
Yeah, and do you think you can talk just a little bit about your syllabus thing that you're doing, and you have like students who you have a something with Patreon that people pay to for some syllabus? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I was. I mean, to be honest, surprised about how interested people were about it. Generally, I mean, I'm an artist, I'm an educator, and I teach at a few schools,
You
and
teach?
I do, yes.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah, generally, I mean, BFA, some MFA students. Yeah, and they're all, visual art, many of them photography, which is my own background, but a lot of them interdisciplinary or interested in digital stuff.
Yeah,
But
because I think that is incredibly interesting and cool how you have like this syllabus thing where people can take like online classes. They just have to be interested in what you're doing. And also for you, and like I have a lot of listeners who are probably also trying to get involved and do stuff like that. And I think that's incredibly interesting and important for like how people get political education in the future.
I should be clear though. Just there's not actually an online class. Like I do streams and podcasts and stuff like that. But this syllabus is specifically formulated for just your own independent reading, and it's
Or yeah, 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 not
yeah.
like a class, sorry, but like the fact that you are writing something that people are interested in enough to pay for and learn about is extremely interesting and I think important.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's $5 for, 2 semesters worth of links. So it's, worst case scenario, it's not that expensive, and you watch some videos, you like it, you read some stuff, you like it. If you don't, yeah, you didn't lose too much money. So I think it's a fair exchange.
Yeah, it's only $5. Like, I think that's yeah, that's incredibly important. Also, another thing, with this internet shit is how a lot of people that I talk to is like, "Yo, I've learned more from your videos than I have in school," or just like, "I've gotten more interested in this shit through YouTube or Instagram and stuff, um,
Yes.
through
Yes.
like way more than traditional school."
That is essentially the problem, in that people are paying a fortune for a university education, and very often there are content producers on social media that are doing it for $5 at a time, and you're getting a much better education. So it's definitely a weird moment we're at right now. I think part of making the syllabus available is just like applying those market forces back onto what seems to be a educational system in crisis. Unfortunately, we don't really have a student debt bailout or anything like that on the horizon for a long, long while. But I would be very surprised if we don't see some version of this. I mean, it seems to be happening already with people offering unaccredited classes over social media about these, theoretical subjects and politics and what have you.
Yeah, and that's another thing where it's like a big debate where people are like, "Oh, well, a lot of the YouTube and the kind of political education on the internet or whatever can be bad because it's unstructured or it's unorganized?" Um,
Also true. Yeah.
and and I think also because this is like the first time where I've seen like you're a content creator, Twitch streamer, and you talk about politics. But like fucking Hassan Piker isn't fucking like writing syllabuses and shit. You know what I'm saying? Like I think structuring it that way, like that is I think that's super important.
Yeah, well, I mean, we all have different roles in it, you know. I mean, I I don't know if I could do those endurance 12-hour streams and
Yeah,
stuff
those
like
are
that. So,
insane.
yeah, but I mean, I think generally, you know, the problem is that one, there are certain ideas that exist in the institution that are really only a product of them being in the institution, and they're completely unrelatable and not useful in the outside world. The other problem is that there's no content producer on social media that you're going to have to pay through the nose for, where your social security wages will be, your social security checks will be garnished when you're 65 because of the debt you've accumulated. So,
Yeah.
the cost of an education is really something quite significant that has to be taken into account. And given all the institutional bias and whatnot, I want to take a kind of thorny position on this as someone who works in academia, obviously. That uh, I do want to encourage people. I think I showed my students a year ago, I showed them a video by Zero Books, like a 9-minute lecture or whatever. But, that was for me a very legitimate source that was met the scholarly, rigorous requirements of being on the syllabus. Did a good job of doing a quick summary of the material, and then we had an hour conversation about it. And I think that's totally fair and very useful.
Yeah, and it's also super insane, like, I will have like, I thought it was more of a Zoomer thing, I guess it is, but, I mean, there will be plenty of people that aren't Zoomers. I'll have which a lot of actually my audience, they are kind of older. If you're talking about politics on the internet, usually there are gonna be kind of older, but I will have friends of mine who are, like, 30 years old, and they will not read a fucking article. They will
Hmm.
only watch videos, you know? And I think a lot of people just it's easier to kind of put on a video and let it play and relax. Um, but I try to tell people like, man, it's not the same thing. Like just reading something, you're gonna retain it a lot more than watching a video. Um, like the actual like the technicalities of it and how we retain information and certain shit like that. I'm really interested in. Um,
That is true too. I mean, there's also, I think, some people who are, different types of learners. As an educator, you tend
oh,
to
that's true. That's
realize
true
this
as
is
well.
like some people, like I just couldn't get them to engage in any reading assignments I gave. But then I'd show them like a video or have them listen to a podcast, and then they'd
Uh-huh.
repeat like from memory like a minute and 45 seconds of the thing. Is like, oh shit, it's just different inroads for different people. And certainly at the
Wow.
scale of some of this stuff, it's pretty significant. So yeah, I mean, we're obviously, in today's society, spending a lot of time in front of screens. More people are just going to be more adept at getting their information through media. So, I mean, I wonder if that tendency might be on the increase. Obviously, there's no watching videos is no substitute for reading stuff, but
No, yeah, that's
yeah.
one thing to be clear on is like, yeah, try to go out and read um alongside the videos.